the Governor of the great state of Louisiana, Honorable John Bel Edwards.
Thank you. Mr. President, Mr. Speaker, Treasurer Kennedy, Commissioner Strain, members of the legislature, honored guests, my fellow Louisianans, good morning. Here we are again. Probably seems like we never left. I've called you back, even though it might feel like you've never left, simply because we have some unfinished business to tend to. And that unfinished business is the difference between whether TOPS is fully funded, whether hospitals in the districts you represent remain open to serve your constituents, and whether we're going to stabilize our great state and put this budget crisis behind us once and for all. Now, we've been through a lot together since being sworn in a little less than 6 months ago. Since January, there have been 3 natural emergencies. We've eliminated a $940 million deficit in the current fiscal year and whittled down the coming year's deficit from more than $2 billion to $600 million. We've cut spending to the tune of $230 million in the current fiscal year alone, implemented a statewide hiring freeze, and underwent an unprecedented review of government contracts, all in an effort to operate government more efficiently and to save taxpayer dollars. And we've begun the process of bringing our federal tax dollars back to Louisiana through Medicaid expansion. Enrollments this month, the coverage starts July 1st, and in the first full year alone, we will save more than $180 million for our state. But while we may all be getting a bit weary of what is beginning to look like and feel like a never-ending legislative process, the simple fact of the matter is there's still more important work left to do. The people who sent us here expect us to finish the job. If we don't address the $600 million deficit, we force critical services to remain unfunded and unprovided next year. So yes, we still have a real mess on our hands, and the longer we put off cleaning up that mess, the more damage we do, and the more problems we create for ourselves and for this state down the line. And don't forget, that $600 million deficit represents the amount needed for a truly standstill budget. The ability of the state to provide the same level of services next fiscal year as this, but without accounting for inflation, merit raises for state employees, or many other things that would normally increase the cost of government from year to year. However, we have something right now that we didn't have at the start of the first special session, a budget plan for next year. And if we can all agree on one thing, it's that we don't particularly like that budget. I don't, and you don't. In fact, the budget's so ugly, I came down to the legislature myself to present it. And despite the very best efforts to craft the most responsible plan and allocate those $600 million in cuts across the budget, this is where we are. K through 12 is short $75 million. Higher education, $54 million. TOPS, $155 million. $174 million cut from critical life-saving health care services, like our public-private partnerships, waivers, and essential Medicaid services. And while it's not the budget you or I want implemented, the truth is it's one of the most honest and disciplined budgets that we've seen in a long time here. It contains no one-time funds, no fund sweeps, and it keeps the Transportation Trust Fund whole by ensuring that gas tax proceeds go for their intended purpose, our infrastructure needs, roads and bridges and ports, while doubling the investment in the Port Priority Program, honoring our commitments to veterans with no cuts to the State Department of Veterans Affairs, and ensuring that the National Guard is fully funded and ready to respond as needed. Because it's time, past time to honestly and responsibly budget for the state of Louisiana, we simply cannot and will not ignore the costs that the previous administration pushed into this year. For instance, for the first time in our state's history since the Medicaid program was formed, my predecessor failed to budget for any Medicaid utilization increase in the current year. They simply ignored it. To make matters worse, made only 11 of the 12 vendor payments, leaving next year's budget with 2 utilization increases and 13 rather than 11 vendor payments. These are the kinds of tricks and gimmicks that have made our budget crisis even worse, and I will tell you that the days of kicking the can down the road are over. The day of reckoning is at hand. That is why I've called you back into another special session now. The need is urgent. There is no time for delay. Our students can't wait. Our hospitals can't wait. Our disabled citizens can't wait. Our universities and community and technical colleges can't wait. K through 12 schools can't wait. And simply put, Louisiana cannot afford to wait. We must fix our problems now. The good news is that the people of Louisiana know that we are in a fiscal crisis. And they expect, actually they demand, that we make the hard decisions necessary to fix it. So for the next 2.5 weeks, we need to be focused on 2 main goals. Well, I wrote that line before yesterday. A third main goal will be to pass a capital outlay bill that allows us to complete essential construction projects, tackle deferred maintenance, and invest in our highway priority program, as well as other critical infrastructure needs. But the first goal, which I plan to talk to you about, was cleaning up some errors that we made in the first special session. The sales tax should not have ended up on school lunches, Girl Scout cookies, or many other items. And in fact, they wouldn't have, except the frantic pace of the final moments of that special session led to some unintended consequences that we need to fix. And therefore, if you've taken a look at the call for this special session, the vast majority of it deals with fixing those problems by removing those sales taxes. Second, we must enact real, meaningful tax reform and close the $600 million deficit remaining for the fiscal year beginning July 1st. That's less than a month away. I hope we can all sense the urgency that is required. In order to do this, the task force that you and I created has provided a framework for us to get the job done and to get it done right. My proposals for this session are fully consistent with that framework. They aren't the recommendations of a Republican task force or a Democratic task force. This is what a group of bipartisan economists and business leaders are telling us we need to do if we want Louisiana to prosper again. And quite simply, some of the items in the call should be no-brainers. One item, an increase on certain health insurance premium, an increase on certain health insurance premium taxes, has already passed the legislature during the first special session with the required 2/3 vote. Unfortunately, CMS did not approve our plan, but we are confident that the version of the bill for this session will gain CMS approval because the increase will be more broad-based, and we will actually be reducing the increase from 6% to 5.5%. We must reduce the lavish tax giveaways enjoyed for too long by too many businesses without regard for their poor return on investment and their negative impact on the state budget overall. This spending must be cut so the revenue can be redirected to more critical unfunded priorities. I'm also asking you to reduce the excess itemized deductions on individual income taxes. This proposal would bring our deduction to 57.5%, what it was before we implemented the Stelly plan. But the best part about this proposal is that 74% of the people of Louisiana don't itemize their deductions, and this will have no impact on them. And at 57.5%, the deduction fully protects charitable donations and mortgage interest deductions. There are other proposals as well, including bracket compression, single sales apportionment on corporate income, and franchise taxes. And many of these proposals have been discussed in Louisiana for years. The only difference is we don't have the option of waiting any longer. We need to start reforming our tax code now. We need a structure that is predictable and stable and sufficient. And let's get a jump start on comprehensive tax reform that we will tackle in 2017. So we have the opportunity right now, by working together, to fully fund TOPS, to keep our hospitals open, to fund K through 12 education, and avoid the 8th straight general fund cut to higher education. And we've already disinvested in higher education in Louisiana over those 8 years to a larger degree than any other state in the nation. In short, we have the opportunity, and I believe we have the obligation to stabilize the state and finally put an end to this fiscal crisis. And as I said, these changes will be a down payment on long-term comprehensive tax reform that we will tackle in April of 2017. You've heard me say this before, but we need to make the harder right choices in the next 2 weeks rather than the easier wrong ones that will have negative long-term effects on our state and cause us to be right back here again trying to deal with these problems. The days of patching our budget together through duct tape solutions, maxed out credit cards, and misguided fund sweeps is over. It's time to turn the page to long-term budget stability. In short, I'm not just asking you to get the job done. I'm asking you to get the job done right and to get it done right now. The people of Louisiana deserve no less. And I understand completely that nobody likes the diagnosis of this fiscal crisis, and nobody likes the prescription. But it's time to take our medicine. I know there hasn't been much of an appetite around here for additional revenue. Look, it's a hard pill for me to swallow too. Contrary to what some of you might think or say, I don't want to raise taxes. And I'll say that again for anybody who wasn't paying attention. This is not what I wanted to do coming into the office of governor. But it is what the job demands of me and of us at this time. I'm not happy about it. I don't take it lightly. But just as we've made significant cuts in spending, we also need to focus our attention on restructuring and reforming our tax code and closing this deficit. Why is this important? Credit agencies have seen through the illusions of the past and downgraded our credit rating twice this year. Once after the first special session because of the temporary nature of the fixes, and also because they only partially addressed the problem. And they've threatened to do it again, and we are on a negative credit watch as we gather today. Now look, it took 8 years to create this crisis, and I know the damage cannot be fully repaired in 1, 2, or 3 sessions, but we can't ignore our problems like we have in the past. More importantly, the people of Louisiana shouldn't have to be here year after year pleading for quality, affordable education, or begging that life-saving waivers and critical Medicaid services are preserved and that safety net hospitals remain open. Let's always remember we work for the people of Louisiana. They've honored us with the opportunity to serve. Let's live up to their expectations and get our act together. We all know what needs to be done. We simply have to look within ourselves and find the political courage to get it done. For those of you who think that special session isn't necessary or delaying it well into the fall is an option, I'd ask you to consider how this wait-and-see approach has worked for us in the past. I cannot imagine a more irresponsible plan. As I've said, credit agencies are watching. Our public-private partnerships are in jeopardy. School starts in August. We have the Revenue Estimating Conference for a reason. They aren't fortune tellers, but they give us the best, most accurate prediction of the revenue that we will have to fund our government. And sometimes, as was the case last year, they overestimated the amount of revenue we would collect. That certainly can happen again. But we can't be in the business of wishing and hoping that additional funds somehow mysteriously become available, only to find out down the road that they're not. That's why we saw mid-year budget cuts in 7 of the last 8 years. And annual mid-year cuts destabilize our critical institutions and punish our people too. The pots of one-time money we're accustomed to finding by this point are gone. That should be very obvious to you, having just gone through the process of putting House Bill 1 together. The previous administration clearly robbed Peter to pay Paul, drastically reducing our cash reserve funds from more than $9 billion to just over $5 billion today, including raiding and depleting the Medicaid Trust Fund for the elderly and many other funds as well. But honestly, even if a large amount of one-time money were available, I would reject that approach. You should know that the Legislative Auditor's Report issued this year, now this is your legislative auditor. That report showed that Louisiana has faced deficits annually averaging $1.2 billion for the last 5 years. The report cited the repeated use of borrowed money and non-recurring revenue as reasons for increased deficits and credit rating downgrades. In fact, more than $800 million in one-time money is in the current year's budget, lined up against recurring expenditures. And that's not the only problem. Our state faces an even bigger problem, our cash flow. The irresponsible budget practices of the previous administration drained virtually every dollar held in funds which the state has used to ensure adequate cash flow as revenue arrives during the year. Our fiscal advisors are now telling us to brace for a cash flow problem, even if we raise the dollars necessary to appropriately fund our critical priorities. And that's true because most of our state's revenue comes in the second part of the fiscal year. Yet our expenses are spread out evenly throughout the year, and our ability to borrow from other funds within state government, known as interfund borrowing, is severely limited. I want to put this into perspective for you. In 2010, we had $4.8 billion at the end of the fiscal year to cover $285 million in expenses. Today, we have $2.5 billion available to cover $1.7 billion in expenses. That in itself is a very serious problem. So the tricks and gimmicks won't work anymore, and they haven't served us well. The truth is they never did work. I will not govern in that fashion, and I urge you to work with me to restore fiscal sanity and responsibility to our state budget. It's time for us to put a budget and plan that is worthy of the people of this state, all of the people of our great state. And so I believe we must do what we reasonably can for the least among us. Our basic obligation in this regard is not waived when it becomes hard or inconvenient. So while it's certainly a challenge, ultimately we will choose whether we will be sheep at the right hand or goats at the left hand. And I know we won't always agree, and I respect that. I respect each and every one of you. I sat where you're sitting. I listened to a governor who too often made empty promises and pretended that all was well. I will not do that. In addition, as you all know, I have spent countless hours meeting with you, listening to your ideas and your concerns, expressing my own and discussing solutions so that together we can choose a path forward that puts people over politics, a path that finally puts Louisiana first. Your constructive ideas, your involvement, your input will be considered. Constructive is the key. Too many people are taking their cues from Washington, and too many people have already spent enough time there to learn the art of distraction and division. But now is the time to govern, not to engage in self-serving, hyper-partisan grandstanding that is largely responsible for the mess that we're dealing with. So let's do it by working together. So I hope by this point you know that my door is always open to you, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican or one of my two independent friends here. Compromise is not a dirty word with me, and I am hopeful that we can work together to address these challenges, not just in this special session, but in the months and years ahead. But for now, let's focus, let's work together, and let's get this crisis behind us so that Louisiana can thrive, not merely survive. That breeze of hope that we felt on January the 11th is still alive. I feel it. The people of Louisiana feel it. So let's harness it. Let's capture that momentum and discover the bright future that awaits us. I know that our best days are ahead because I know that we're going to make our best effort right now to fix our problems. And as I've said it before, I believe in the awesome power of prayer. So once again, I ask you and the people of Louisiana to pray for all of us, for you and for me, as we begin this work, and I will do the same for you. So God bless you, God bless America, and God bless the great state of Louisiana. Now let's get to work.